Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Matt Scarborough, Scarborough Bicycle Accident Law, and we're super excited or stoked to have a friend in the community, Dave Ragsdale, with us. So, Dave, we appreciate your time. We're super excited to help you with some triathlons this summer, and we want to spread the word about the great company you work with, Integrity Multisport. So, I wanted to start it out a little bit by telling us about your relationship with them and how long you've been working with them, all that good stuff.
Well, good morning, Matt, and thanks a lot for having me here.
Sure.
I appreciate the opportunity to share a message of mine, a message of interest to hopefully a lot of the folks get to know your community, and as we work together in a relationship. Integrity Multisport, it's an interesting story that it's a business that only since during the pandemic, it renamed itself as Integrity Multisport. It was born as multi-race. And the original owners, Rob and Mercedes Childers, started it back in the early 2000s and had created, I knew them from day one because as I mentioned in our pre-show meeting, I used to sell advertising for Florida Sports, Competitor Southeast, Competitor Magazine. These are all different names of the same vehicle. And so Rob and I did some business, and I knew Rob from, I don't know if it was day two, but it was probably day three. And so we used to work together in a couple different capacities. I'd sell him some advertising. I'd help him out with some announcing at some of his events. And his success was such that he had some investors in Miami looking to purchase a business to take it to that quote unquote next level.
Right.
And they did that for a number of years under the multi-race name. Rob still did a lot of consulting he's a developer by trade. And so the platform that they're on for registration is one of his own making, does scoring, timing, et cetera. And somewhere along the way leading up to the pandemic, as you can imagine, business gets a little tight. The event business essentially falls through a big hole in the ground. And the folks who owned the business had to effectively, they couldn't operate it anymore.
Right.
And so Rob, being the proud founder of his business, jumps in, takes it back over again to sort of to reinvent what was multi-race into Integrity Multisport. And that's where he and I got involved a little bit more. I've been in the corporate partnership space for a number of years, probably for the better part of my career in different levels and different groups. And so he's good at one thing, I'm better at another thing. And so the relationship sort of continues. I don't do the announcing work for him. A buddy of mine does that, but I help him with partnerships like the one that we're doing with you and Scarborough Bicycle Accident Law. So it's a pretty easy thing for me to do because of the background that I've got. It's just that like with anything, the hardest thing is just to find the right person at the right place to
Sure.
start that conversation. And I was lucky that the guy whose name's on the front of the building is the guy you get to talk to, namely yourself. So,
Well, I appreciate you reaching out to us. It's super exciting to be involved in, I guess it's four triathlons, all at Fort DeSoto,
right,
which is
right.
is amazing venue for us. Why did you choose Fort DeSoto for your races and tell me what type of person you typically see at your races?
Fort DeSoto, I won't say that I was involved in the selection of it, but as you know from its history, that little event in downtown St. Pete called St. Anthony's.
That little one, yes.
Yeah, it had originally started back in the 82 or 83 as one of the stops on the Bud Light US Triathlon Series, one of the original triathlon series that was held.
Mhm.
And so it was held at Fort DeSoto, almost all completely contained in the fort. It's a very easy place to put on an event. You basically close that front gate and the rest of it's yours, right?
Right.
And so the history there is 40 plus years. And so when Rob, who started his events, the multi-race and now integrity events, the footprint was South Florida, some Broward County, some mostly in Miami-Dade County, the Miami Man, which was the season-ending race. He decided that, he saw Fort DeSoto through the success of other operators. He saw it as a place worth looking into to create another market for athletes. And that was probably 15 plus years ago. And so it's been a place that is relatively, in the event world, it's a relatively easy spot to operate because of the logistical nature. The only challenge you seem to deal with is depending on how much rain or wind and what that does to the water just off of the North Beach, that beach entrance. But it's a great place with a great tradition. I mean, we certainly are not Integrity is not the only one putting events on, the Escape from the Fort DeSoto and a bunch of races out there. So it's our intention is to try to hold up the reputation of the location and continue to deliver the type of quality events that take place there throughout the racing calendar.
Yeah, it looks like we are sponsoring an event in June 2nd, one July 14th, one August 25th, and then one September 29th. So basically throughout the summer
Right.
into September, for everyone listening out there, and for our community, what types of triathlons are these? Meaning, are these sprint? What are the distances, Dave?
Rob was a very smart guy, Matt, from the get-go, and he realized that he wanted to make the events as inclusive as possible. Make, for a lot of people, the barrier to entry in a triathlon or in a multi-sport event of any types, it's perceived more than its reality. So every single one of the events early on, there would be a sprint race, one with a quarter, 3/8 of a mile swim, 10 mile or so bike, 5K run. Always a sprint race. And then as an alternative for the non-swimmers, you'd throw a mile run and in place of that first swim, and there'd be the sprint duathlon. And then he realized that there was an appetite for a little longer race. And given the format and the locations, created what is termed an international distance, but what I more familiarly describe as a double sprint. It's twice the swim, it's 2 loops on the bike and 2 loops on the run. So it turns into half mile, 1K, 20 miles or so, and then a 10K run at the end. A few years ago, as you probably know the history of this because of all, your background, people were starting to sort of experiment with swimming, biking, and finito in what they call the aqua bike. And so that's been added in as well. So truly an opportunity and relays as well too. So, I mean, there's an opportunity. I was talking with someone about a partnership yesterday, and she was saying, oh, but I'm really not a very good swimmer. I'm like, oh, but wait, there's more, so it's a great opportunity. Like with any event, I think savvy event operators are smart enough to realize that you need to be as inclusive as possible and try to create as simple an opportunity for them to be a part of an event as possible. And I think that's, you continually work on that, but I think the range of options over the range of distances accomplishes that largely.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And it's what I really welcome when talking to you, Dave, is how you're trying to get more people involved in the sport. And for example, with me, I have a bad back injury and I can't run anymore, but
Mm-hmm.
I could do the relay if I wanted. If I really wanted to, I could probably do the swim as well. So I think it's wonderful that, all different types and groups of people can come do these events.
Well, it's from a business standpoint, it makes sense to whether you have an event that's got 200 people or an event that's got 600 people, the amount of work involved in the 600 isn't 3 times. So you have sort of some of these economies of scale. So the idea that you can remove those perceived barriers and encourage people to get involved in whatever way, shape, or form. There's a lot of, even, you and I being in this space, any kind of athletic space, you become so familiar with it that it's just part of your daily conversation. But there are still a lot of people that you'll tell a story about, oh yeah, we're sponsoring, we're partners for this event series out at Fort DeSoto this summer. And they're like, what is it? And you explain, you start telling people, they're like, they have a look on their face like, what? They immediately
Right.
think of like the Iron Man in Hawaii, or some crazy thing where somebody took on 50 events in 50 days, this kind of stuff. But you just kind of,
Right.
hold on. Let me explain to you that this is something certainly within your reach, or maybe just a little bit out of your reach that you can still grab for.
And I think that's exciting to be just a little bit out of reach for a lot of people. If they
Well,
put in some work,
yeah, yeah,
some amazing things could happen.
yeah, yeah.
What do you recommend to someone who is like, I've never done a triathlon before. I see that these events aren't the longest. I can get through a short swim, a 10-mile bike, and maybe the run. How do you suggest people get started on that road to thinking about doing an event and then doing the event, Dave?
Matt, that's a great question that you could come at that from so many different angles. I think that my recommendation after being around in this sport, I talked about the early 80s and that event out at Fort DeSoto. I was part of the second year, so I think it's 83 maybe. So
Right.
I've got a couple of rings around my trunk, if you will. And so I sort of have gotten to a point where I feel like if everybody could just, if you wanted to try something out like this, practice a little bit of swimming, go to the local pool, go to your lake, wherever it is, practice a little bit of that. Go out and ride your bike around. I mean, everybody rode the bike. If you haven't ridden your bike in a while, just wherever bike you've got, use it. Don't worry about going and finding a big fancy bike. There's plenty of time for that. And then, go to the gym, run around your block, and just sort of take it on as a challenge to yourself, with the primary, really only objective is to finish and to
Right.
have a good time. And then once you've gone through that first time, you've convinced yourself, hey, I can do this. And then you can start playing that game with yourself. Well, I think if I just, if I practiced a little bit more, I could swim this much faster. Or if I biked a little bit more, and now I need to get that bike at the local bike shop that my friend, and this is where, people start diving diving full in. But I really believe, as somebody who's had a background in competitive sports since my high school days, I think that sometimes what's lost is just the simple joy and sense of accomplishment. I'm going to share a quick story. I I've been working as an event announcer for a variety of groups, and the primary group that I work with is Ironman, and the primary distance of event I work with is that 70.3 distance, the half iron distance. And what I'm always impressed by is not only the capabilities of the people, but if when I find myself behind the finish line as opposed to in front of the finish line, the exhilaration coming down the line of somebody accomplishing something like that, 3 or 4 steps back after the finish line, you can see in their face just what it means to them.
Right.
The happiness, the tears, the shock, and it's really, meanwhile, there are loads of people running through looking at their watch and, have a bad look on their face because they were 1 minute slower than they thought they were going to be or something. I mean, wow, this other person's like, holy beep, beep, beep. I can't
Right.
believe I did it. And
Yeah.
so I think that's an important thing to remember, is just how, oh, think about the first time you competed in something as a kid or as an adult or whatever, and it was something that maybe was a little bit outside of your comfort zone,
Sure.
and you accomplish it. It's really pretty difficult to, you can tell the story, but it's hard to share the emotion associated with it. And I think that really is, you know, I sound like some old guy sitting on a park bench, but that's really what I do believe, is that I don't think it's missing. I just think that it would, people need to more appreciate what they've accomplished every single time.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I think that that's a great function of getting older. I'm with you, Dave, on that. Is that I'm not fast anymore, but I truly enjoy the ability to finish some of the things that, I want to do. And that by
Yeah,
itself
yeah,
is amazing. And it
yeah.
feels good for
It,
sure.
it does, and it should. And I think that sometimes we as a society sort of have this expectation of ourselves that maybe is not realistic, or does something that doesn't allow us to appreciate what we've accomplished. So, because there's always somebody who's done a little bit more, a little bit faster, a little bit harder, a little bit, whatever the circumstances are. But
Yeah,
I really would encourage anybody getting involved in any activity. I know people who started swimming, and you'll see posts on various social media like, "Oh, I can't believe it. I swam 500 yards all at once without stopping." And you're like, yeah, exactly. Good for you. Because they probably couldn't get across, they get across the pool and stop and have to take a break and then decide, oh
right.
shoot, I've got to go back, And so it's just, I don't know. I don't think it's something to be discounted.
No. So tell us your origin story, Dave. How did you get involved in sports and
Mm.
how'd you get involved in triathlon?
See, ran, believe it or not, I played football all through high school. I went to a small school powerhouse outside of New York City. We never lost a game the entire time that I was in high school, but for what that's worth. But
That's
in the
that's
off
worth a lot.
season,
That's
what?
worth a lot. What position did you play?
As far away from the action as possible. I played wide receiver, so and I
Okay.
played for a guy who was I was lucky enough to catch passes from a guy who turned into a sort of all-state guy in New York and all this kind of stuff. So it was a lot of fun. But in the winter, I started running track because I was a pretty decent runner, and I'd run spring track, and that sort of began the whole competitive thing. Ran cross country and track in college. And when I got out of college, sort of continued with the running and met an old buddy of mine in New York City. We were both working corporate jobs in New York City. And all of a sudden up starts popping up in like the very early 80s, probably 82 or so, this thing called triathlon. And, I swam at the local pool. I rode a bike to and from work. And of course I ran. So back in, I think it was 83, we were still living in the city, and we grabbed the bikes, put them on a rental car, and drove up to Bear Mountain and did a Olympic distance race. Essentially the 1,500-meter swim, 40K bike, 10K run. The first two of which I had never done in their entirety. Never swam a mile at one time. Never biked 25 miles at one time. Ran a load of 10Ks, and in the end, it all worked out. So one thing kind of led to another. So, and that was back in the days when you'd explain to people what you were doing, and they just sort of look at you with a quizzical look on their face and probably walk away and mutter something that was sort of like, oh man, what's wrong with that guy? And now these days, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, chatting with someone, and oh yeah, my neighbor does this. So this is the kind of where it is. It's not everybody. Triathlon is still a sport that could grow a whole lot more.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of the mission that any event operator has, is to try to just encourage more people to get involved. So, but my story is one of that. There's many stories within that story, but I think that's a fair enough treatment there. So
Yeah. Are you still doing events, or are you just kind of doing these sports recreationally at all anymore, Dave?
I ride the bike in the gym, but I'm not a real fan of being out on the roads,
Hmm.
even though I live less than a mile from the beach road here in Juneau. So it's a pretty comfortable place.
Sure.
I still swim a fair amount. I run, 15 miles. Like most people, I've got some meniscal issues in one knee. So the amount of running I can do at once is certainly less than I once did. I mean, I've done my share of marathons and the rest. So the past is the past, and this is where we are.
Very good.
So Yeah. So no, haven't raced in a. It's funny you mentioned that because I was my way back from our community's gym and pool today. I saw a guy riding by on a mountain bike, rather determined look on his face. And I sort of thought, you know what? Maybe I should just, do a fat tire division of a triathlon.
Mhm.
A lot easier to deal with. You don't have, again, you can kind of manage your expectations, but we shall see.
Are there fat tire divisions in Florida?
Yeah, some events, and I'm trying
Mhm.
to think of the last time I managed the results. I I'm pretty sure I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure the integrity events do have, well, they not only have like a weight category where you have the Clydesdales and Athenas, but
Sure.
I'm pretty sure there's also a fat tire division where people can do it on a mountain bike. And for sometimes first timers, they've got a mountain bike, but they don't have a road or a tri bike or something. And so that, it makes it a little bit easier to jump in and kind of compete against those who are similarly,
Mhm.
equipped, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I think that, I think the sport has always been one of early adoption, of willing to try things. And so the idea of aqua bike or fat tire or the first timer division or, whatever the circumstances are, I think that for somebody looking at this activity from the outside looking in, I think the tendency is to see barriers. And so if you could
Right.
do anything to kind of knock those barriers down, I think it makes life a lot easier, to tell you the truth. So,
No, yeah, I agree. A triathlon I did in 2004, and I remember it so well because it was the day a major hurricane Charlie hit Florida on the southwest coast. I was in Georgia doing an Xterra race.
mhm,
Um, and I found that event to be not so serious, still very challenging. It was in the mountains of Georgia, but just a
right.
lot of fun. And
So you,
I'd like to
so
do
you
some more
did,
of those.
you're substituting the road for trail on the mountain bike, right?
Ex
Is that the
ex
idea?
yes, exactly. So that
Cool.
was a super kind of fun event. And, I do one mountain bike event still per year just because I love mountain biking. So, I think whatever way that we can get people involved in a community, and then if we have a safe place for them to do some type of racing or
Yeah.
testing themselves, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a couple of keys, and obviously with the, with your legal background, we hear all too often the stories of people who have fateful encounters with vehicles,
Yes,
each other, whatever it is. And so I think that in itself has changed a little bit the way people approach their training. I know a lot of sort of higher end athletes who will 80% of their riding is indoors. And the technologies and the devices and the rest of it are such that it doesn't seem to hamstring them in any way. And ultimately, let's face it, the story. It's, the old saw in riding is that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. All of us who have ridden a bike enough times have had an encounter somewhere along the way, you know,
sure.
right?
Yeah. Oh, we have. And I encourage
Yeah.
people to use Zwift. Locally in the Tampa Bay area, we have some really, really good trail systems that are
Mm-hmm.
still very safe. Like the Sun Coast is now, gosh, it's probably 80 miles of rolling hills now, a super safe place to
Yep.
ride. And I still miss being on the road, but I try to stay off the road as much as possible because unfortunately, most of my clients are younger guys on the road or triathletes on the
Yeah.
road.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
it's not,
it just, car versus bicycle, who wins?
yes,
Rare, car big, bike small. In some of the meetings I do in advance of events, I try to remind people that if the roads, it's very difficult to be in an event where the roads are truly closed down. And even if they are closed down, you have to tend with each other. So you
Yeah.
just sort of keep trying to remind people you're not wearing an invincible shield of armor. You're subject to a lot of things that you're not planning on, but if you thought just a little bit about it and kind of applied a little bit of the golden rule to other athletes, to vehicles on the road, et cetera, you might turn out a little bit better. But I think that, the excitement that's attached to competing sometimes overinflates people's expectations of what they can do, or
Yes.
what they think they can do. And I'm, my stories are like this. I imagine yours is well beyond the height of the screen because of what you do representing these people and in these accidents that deal with. I'm sure you've heard untold stories.
Yeah, if it can happen, it will happen
Yeah.
at any time. And unfortunately, as cyclists too, I think that we have to take some responsibility
Yes. Yes.
upon ourselves, follow the rules of the road,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just be extra careful because it's, a couple of seconds. It's just not worth
Yes.
it at
Uh,
the end
we
of the day.
we all know people who I can think of a number of friends who are no longer with us because of that one, multi-second incident.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I think you're right. I think that if when you're in a car, the bike's the problem. When you're on a bike, the car is the problem. But it's neither. It's the relationship between the two. You wouldn't blow through a red light in a car, but you do it on your bike if you were the group of people and you look both ways and you think everything's okay.
Right.
But you wouldn't do that in a car.
No, you wouldn't.
But
And
yeah.
as cyclists, we have to realize that that's a huge problem. And
Yeah.
the reality is, Dave, and I don't know if a lot of people throughout the state of Florida know this yet, but we had some major tort reform occur last year in March of 2023. And so now there's a 50% rule. So before in that scenario, if a cyclist ran a red light or did, a rolling stop at a
Hmm.
red light or a stop sign, like all of us have done, okay?
Right.
I've done it a bunch of different times.
Yeah,
Every
of
cyclist
course.
I've ever known has done a rolling stop. Well, the other side, if you're involved in an accident, is going to say, well, that cyclist is at fault. The old rule was a jury could determine, let's say the cyclist was 52% at fault for running that stop sign.
Hmm.
The cyclist would be awarded 48% of his damages. So if it was $1 million verdict, the cyclist would be awarded $480,000, for
Okay.
example. Okay,
Okay.
so a jury would split some liability. Now, under the new rule, if a cyclist or anyone in a car accident, for that matter, is more than 50% at fault, they get zero if a jury comes back. So under that same scenario,
Oh,
if a jury determined that you were 51% at fault for an accident, you get nothing. So it's even more important for us
wow. Wow.
as
Wow.
cyclists to pay attention to these traffic rules and follow them because it's going to be super easy for a jury to say, you might be more than 50% at fault. You don't get anything.
I'm going to flip the scenario here and sort of what you've just said has led me to think of some questions.
Sure.
How as a practitioner and somebody who's in that space representing these people day in and day out, what do you do in your firm? I mean, that's new. I mean, do I keep track of these things? No. Do I consider myself relatively well informed? I'd like to think so. But what you just shared is something I'm completely unfamiliar with. So how could you, so what, that's part of your mission, obviously, is to educate people. So how do you effectively do that from the position of an attorney, accident law, athlete, et cetera?
A few ways. So, at any event, at any bike shop, different communities, I have a PowerPoint speech, basically on all these tort reform changes that I give,
Mm-hmm.
and I line it up with basically bicycle accident laws in the state of Florida. So that's helpful to get the word out. We have blogs on our basically our website. bicycleaccidentlaw.com, where we discuss the 50% rule and how it impacts people. I do it on Instagram as well, Facebook as well. But I tell you, it's hard to get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And it's very hard. Cyclists don't want to hear this news. Okay. They don't, because everybody wants to roll through stop signs or do different things.
Right,
I've wanted to
right.
do the same thing for years, but the reality is now there is a real ramification against you
No
if
doubt.
if you do that. So we just try to spread the word to the community, Dave, and what we're doing.
I guess it just becomes part of the, it's your own elevator speech, if you will. You're trying to
Yeah.
just educate people and, hey, share this way. You find that I think, it's been a long time since I've ridden with the group. I sort of decided that that really wasn't my thing. But I do know that these groups tend to have their respected leaders, the people who kind of manage the group and do everything in their power to
Mhm.
sort of ensure they're behaving appropriately. And so I would imagine identifying these people and getting information to them is probably helpful, because hearing it from a guy like you, yeah, okay, whatever. Hearing it from the person right next to them in the Peloton who's out there every Saturday, whatever, that's
Right.
different. You know what I mean? You're hearing it from a fellow athlete, not somebody, oh, you're just trying to drum up business or some such thing that, people have. But I would think that finding influencers, if you will, if you want to
Mhm.
call them that, you have to get people who, hey, no, I'm going to tell you what the story is. And
Right.
they're going to kind of, they're going to get somebody and they're going to tell it to them very specifically, where the look on the face should be like, what?
Right. Nothing.
But yeah, there's no buts.
Yeah.
You're out of luck, you
So
know?
we've had some luck so far in talking to those people, mainly
Mm-hmm.
on social media. So tell me about your announcing career, Dave, because you definitely have a radio voice for sure. How did that start?
I worked back in the early 80s, not too much after got involved in triathlon. I worked with a group called Exclusive Sports Marketing. They were based out of Boca Raton here in southern Palm Beach County. And at the time, they put on their own series. The guy behind, a fellow named Steve T-Bon, was what would be the way to describe? He was a trailblazer in the space. He was an athlete himself. Maybe not. He became a pretty good triathlete, but it's not where it started. But he had an athletic background. He was an unbelievable marketer, and he could sell your shirt back to you, and you would think you got a great deal.
Right.
So he came up with, he hooked up with Bud Light, got the distributors involved, started doing these weekends around. I think ultimately it got to about 9 weekends all over the state of Florida, where, you know, depending on the weekend, one weekend, I might be out helping out on the bike course. Another weekend, I might be down at the swim start at the lake or the beach. Another weekend, it might be setting up the racks in transition. Another weekend, and so somewhere along the way, a couple of weekends, I found myself with a microphone in my hand and a printed list of participants by number stapled up to Coroplast sheets. So literally, I'm looking down, looking here, trying to call names out, looking down, people are calling out numbers. And then it became a keypad on a laptop. And then, of course, it turned into the timing chip 60 yards down the road, and you can't miss a single person. So ultimately, I always say to people, I found out that holding a microphone was a lot easier work for me than moving a
Mhm.
barricade or placing cones or moving around generators or placing out bike racks or what have you. And so that career is still in place and something that I really enjoy. I use educate, inform, and entertain, and not necessarily in that order. That's kind of how I position it all. So I have a good time. I enjoy it because I have a background as a as an athlete, I think it's very helpful to have that background to be able to share with people sort of some insights, and also be able to share with people who are there. There are a lot of people who come to spectate at events who have never seen the event before. And so they're not really sure, what am I looking at? What are they doing now? Why is this happening? Why? And so you want to educate the spectator so that they can enjoy the experience a lot more. So yeah, I'm pretty lucky that I find myself in the right place at the right time. And it's something that I do enjoy an awful lot. So
What events are you announcing now, Dave?
let's see. Down here in South Florida, I've been working with their corporate run series at a running store out of Miami called Footworks has been putting on what was the Mercedes-Benz corporate run. Now it's a Lexus corporate run. It's 3 stops, so that's 3 weeknights, which is nice. In the event world, we all talk about, can we get more events on weeknights because the weekends are busy. I'll be going to with Ironman. I'll be going to Chattanooga, back to Eagle Man, Augusta, up to Sandusky, Ohio. My season ends with the triathlon season ends up in Panama City Beach with my only iron distance event, of course, Ironman Florida, which has been going on for, so we think 26 years now. And then I also do some work Miami Marathon, which is big event down here in Miami. And I think I mentioned in our pre-call conversation, I've worked now for about 6 years with the folks with ALSAC, the fundraising and awareness arm of the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And
Right.
so I've been working that event, which is a single day marathon, half marathon, 10K, 5K with 20 some thousand people. And it's just, it's an awful lot of fun. And there's so many fabulous stories. So yeah, I'm, like I said, I'm pretty lucky that I found myself into this space.
That's
So
that's great. How
yeah.
how do you tell the backstories of people? Because I think that's kind of the most interesting thing to know, where somebody came from, how much work they're putting in. Are you able to do that on the course at all?
There are opportunities at about, I think maybe 3 or 4 of the Ironman events I worked last year had professional fields. And so obviously professionals have an easier background to track down where they've been racing, where they've been, kind of what they've done. Some of that background comes sometimes from the individual or the people who are friends with the individual, that they'll share a story. Hey, my friend Jerry, he's out here. He's a 3-time cancer survivor, and and he's number this, that, and the other. And do you think you could, so you're making, while you're watching, you're doing 3 things at once. You're watching people come in, you're saying things, and you're making notes because you don't want to miss anybody's opportunity to recognize what they've done.
Right.
And if you can, and if you do have that moment where you can tie all those pieces together, you do get that look on the face of the individual that, they're like, wow, I mean, how did you know that? I'll tell you something really simple. On the laptop, among the information that can be put in there, one is a very simple category, and it's BDAY. And at any event, a couple thousand people, there's probably a dozen, 15 people who are celebrating a birthday.
Sure.
And so I always have a great time where you realize they'll go through, you get their name, and then you look over on the other side and you're like, hey, Matt. And you'll get Matt will look over like, happy
Well,
birthday. And they're
right.
like, what? Like what? Like,
Awesome.
they're like, thank you. So it's just, catching people in those little moments where they're so focused on that thing called the finish line, that you pop them out of that and you mention something about them and like, oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay, great. Hey, so it's fun. It's fun. And you run into a lot of people over time. So you get to know folks who have continued to do crazy things as well. So
That's wonderful that you can tie it together. One question that I'll kind of finish this up with here today, Dave, and I ask everybody, being the One Community Local Leaders podcast, is, I could tell that you do have a lot of integrity. I can tell that you do like to entertain. I can tell that you work hard at what you do. What do you think you bring to the table to this community as one of the leaders in this space?
um You hit on a few of the concepts. You know, people wonder, let me see, is it here? Oh yeah, it is. Hang on a second.
Sure.
Years ago, I was at an event and there's a logo here where my finger is. And basically the event wanted to make sure everybody who was working the event had a name tag. And the event doesn't exist anymore, but I basically just puts a little bit of electric tape and I wear this when I go to events because I want people to know who they're talking to. Not that who I am, but that they often, because I've got the microphone, a wireless mic in my hand, they're going to come to me looking for information. And sometimes they're happy seekers, and sometimes they're not such happy seekers. And so I find that having my name tag makes a connection with them before they even know who I am or how I can help them, which I usually can. And I also think it's, so I bring, the other part of that is that I stand by what I say, and I remember that I represent the organization that I'm working for, whether I'm at a Integrity Multisport event or at the Lexus Corporate Run or at the Lifetime's Miami Marathon or the St. Jude Memphis Marathon weekend. I represent that event when I am there. And so it's important for me to present the best position possible. So if I can help somebody, I'm going to help them. I'm going to do whatever I can to help them. And if I don't have that answer, I'm going to try to figure out a way to get that done. So I try to be as straightforward and as honest and as helpful as possible. And I think I sort of put myself in, what would I want from me if I were somebody approaching me? And I like to think that I do a pretty good job at it. I'm not sure that I get it 100% of the time. One of the favorite stories that athletes tell me is race morning, dark, a lot of anxiety, a lot of nervousness. And people will say, you know, when I got close to the site, I could hear your voice and you were calm. You weren't like getting hyped up. You were calm. Good morning, everybody. You know, just the usual, how are we doing? This is the story, water temperature. This is here, this is there. And they say, you know what? When I hear your voice, it makes me feel better, makes me feel calm because it sort of sets me up for a better day, which that's, you know, when I was first told that, I've been told that more than once. I don't know, it's kind of one of those things where you're thinking, really? I did all that? I was just doing what I do and thinking, how would I want to hear this? How would I want to hear me saying what I'm saying? Because there's a whole day to get excited. If you're at level 11 at 5 a.m. in the morning, it's going to be a long day for
Right.
everybody, you know? So I think that I just try to do the best job that I can. I try to be an honest person who shares truth and who exemplifies the happiness of doing what I'm doing, that I enjoy what I'm doing, because I do. I really do. It's hard work, but I enjoy what I do. It's a real, it's a real pleasure. It really is. I think back in my career and I think, man, if I'd only known I was going to do this sooner, maybe I'd gone down a whole different career path somewhere. But yeah, this is where I am. So
Well, Dave, thank you for sharing the truth. I really enjoy. I could talk to you forever, but
I didn't share the whole truth, nothing but the truth, though. But I came pretty close. I
you
bet
you did.
if you swore me in earlier, you'd have gotten a couple more stories out of me. But I'm not sure if they're NSFW, you know, that kind of thing. So,
Yeah. Well, what's
right.
funny is in my world as well, people ask me all the time, well, how should I say this? Well, how do I need to word this response? And my answer to them is tell the truth.
Tell the truth. Yeah.
Tell the truth. And if you tell the truth, people can see that. They'll
Yeah.
respect it, even if
Yeah.
you fumble your way through it.
And it's
They,
super easy to
pe-
remember too, you know, right?
yeah, right.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
Matt, I think, on behalf, speaking on behalf of Integrity Multisport, we do want to thank you and your organization. We're excited about what this first year of working together is going to be. I look forward to meeting you in person and shaking your hands at one of the events. And I think it's going to be a fun year. Fort DeSoto is a great place, and we're so happy to have an organization like yours a part of it. So thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, no problem, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you. Catch you later.